degree in printmaking from Boulder. So today I'm going to talk about Elizabeth Layton. 40 years ago, next month, she found herself in a depressed state. She was 68 years old and had been depressed half of her life. One of her children had died and put her even farther in her depression, which had included 13 shock treatments. So she was in a bad state. Her sister took one of those Saturday morning art classes for blue-haired ladies, and her sister said, "Elizabeth, why don't you do what I do? Take an art class, and maybe one or the other of us will become the next Grandma Moses." And so Elizabeth drove from Wellsville, Kansas. You all know Wellsville?
Yeah.
It's a town of about 1,000 football fans. And so Elizabeth drove to Ottawa and enrolled in drawing at Ottawa University. The teacher was teaching contour drawing, or blind contour drawing. So Elizabeth followed his instructions and began drawing pictures of herself by looking in the mirror and drawing blindly, not looking at her paper while she was doing the outline of her drawing. She did about 1,000 of these drawings in her 15-year art career with some pretty remarkable results. I was a 27-year-old newspaper reporter in Ottawa and always looking for a good story. I had just written a story about someone's pet duck, so I was desperate. And so I wandered into the student union, and there, amidst the muddy, still life paintings and drawings done by the 19-year-old students, there were two drawings that stood out. They were drawings of an old woman with a sagging face and very expressive eyes. And those eyes spoke to me, and I spoke back, and then I learned that the artist was a 68-year-old taking her first art course. So I was so moved that I thought, these drawings are not going to do any good if they're under the bed. I have to get them out and get them shown. I don't have time to fart around. I got to do it now. And so that's what I started doing. That was, again, 40 years ago, in a couple of months. The result was, well, initially when I started showing her work to people, like the curator at the Nelson and the curator at the Spencer Museum at KU, the response was, "Well, this is kind of interesting, but we don't think anyone would want to look at pictures of an old woman." So, to make a long story short, 14 years later, Elizabeth had a one-person show at the Smithsonian. And with help from the Mid-America Arts Alliance, which is right down that way, I think that way, there was a one-person exhibit that toured to 150 places across the country. I was able to get her covered in Life magazine, People, Parade, Good Morning America, NPR, 5 times, etc. So now I'll show you some of her work. We start with this lithograph called Censor. Now, in the book, find the book, and the second, there's Elizabeth did a drawing called Censor. Pardon? Yeah. And she did that drawing because there was a senator named Jesse Helms from North Carolina, an obnoxious curmudgeon, and he was trying to censor art, and actually he was trying to shut down the National Endowment for the Arts. And so Elizabeth did this drawing called Censor, where she has been censored. Her principles have been crossed out, and there are examples of art behind her, including drawings from Tiananmen Square that have also been X'd out. So she did the drawing, and from that, not copying, but inspired by the drawing, she did a lithograph. This was produced by the Lawrence Lithography Workshop, that's Mike Sims, and it was done in an edition of 100, and they all sold, except for one. I learned yesterday that one remains. Copies of this lithograph are in some pretty interesting places. I gave one to the museum in Chapel Hill. That's the home of Jesse Helms. They were quite pleased to get it because Jesse Helms had made quite a statement about Chapel Hill, which they're quite proud of. He said, as the community was thinking about putting in a new zoo, Jesse Helms said, why don't we just build a fence around Chapel Hill? So they have shown this lithograph, and they've also shown it at the Whitney Museum in New York and elsewhere.